Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother Asar Hotep with the Madhu Mandela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture, here on Saturday, November the 3rd, to briefly discuss some benefits for adding linguistics to your toolbox. And I'm doing this on the cusp of offering an online class for those who are autodidacts, those who are into Africana Studies and the like, or theological studies and the like, and want to add some skills that will enhance their studies. So what I'm essentially arguing here is that linguistics enhances your studies on human populations. And so I'm offering a class on linguistics, and it's the first of a series of 3. And so the first series is going to be on just general linguistics. The second series is going to be on historical comparative linguistics. And then there's going to be a part 2 to the historical comparative linguistics. So 3 classes total. But right now I'm just offering the basics. It's a crash course. It's going to be 8 weeks. And you're going to learn the fundamentals to be able to understand some of the arguments in my work, in my upcoming work, which is going to be especially important, but more so individuals like Dr. Christopher Ehret or Jean-Claude Mboli or Sheikh Anta Diop or Dr. Theophilo Obenga, who utilize a lot of linguistic arguments as it regards matters of Africana history and culture. So I've been asked for years, if I would teach, linguistics and to get everyone up to speed, because it's not that many of us in the Americas who utilizes linguistics in their arsenal to the rescue and recovery of African history and culture. And so when they come across works like mine or Diop or Obenga and others, they feel kind of at a loss because they can, understand the overall arguments, but it's those fundamental details for which the arguments are made that a lot of people are having trouble with. And so I want to ease that for the conscious community, whatever you want to call the lay person, the general enthusiast, and even the professional who may have not had an opportunity to take linguistic courses and understand why this is so important when we're talking about different subjects regarding African studies. And so I have a brief presentation. Normally I would have it in a PowerPoint, but there's a particular section in the PowerPoint that uses some equations, and I'm on this Ubuntu machine operating system. And for some reason, the program that utilizes, that's supposed to be the substitute for PowerPoint, it does all kind of crazy things to the formatting. And so instead of trying to recreate it in that program, I just decided to save it as a PDF. And so we're going to be scrolling through the PDF. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And I appreciate everyone who is live. And, please share when you have an opportunity and leave comments. And more importantly, go to the website, www.asarmhotep.com, and sign up for the course. It's just $40. And this is just the introductory price. So it's going to go up in a number of weeks. So take advantage of it while it's fairly cheap. But here we go. Sharing the screen. So now I will go to the presentation. So bong. So the original title of this is The Benefits of Learning Linguistics, Why Linguistics is a Key Component of African Liberation. And we can get to the liberation component of that a little later. But the date on here is the 2nd, which is Friday, which I did a presentation on my Facebook Live. So now I'm just doing this again on YouTube. So for those who haven't had an opportunity, A shameless plug, pick up my latest book, Nesubiti, King in Ancient Egyptian, A Lesson in Paronymy and Leadership. And so there are some key linguistic insights that help us to better understand ancient Egyptian concepts and the relationship between ancient Egyptians and sub-Saharan African groups. So pick that up. You can go to my website, www.asarimhotep.com, and hit the shop link, and you'll be able to get a hold of this text. So before I begin, a lot of people ask me my quote unquote qualifications and where did I learn linguistics. And I want to give my intellectual genealogy because there's a mix in how I come to understand and continue to understand the field of linguistics. So way back in undergrad in 2001 or 2002, I went to a conference in Houston, Texas. It was an African American Studies Symposium conference. And I was presenting as an undergrad at this conference on the meaning of the word Kemet and my issues with the current arguments up to that time regarding the meaning of Kemet. And so there was a lot of scholars there, got a lot of good feedback, and a lot of good connections were made at this conference who have continued to help me and enhance my studies from that point on. But one of the individuals who I met at this conference went by the name, of course, of or is known Dr. Mario Beatty, who's a well-known Medu Neter scholar and reader of Medu Neter, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic language. He teaches currently at Howard University. I think he was at Brown at the time in Chicago, I think. But at this conference, I met him. I think he saw my talk. We talked afterwards. And the first thing he said is that you need to have discussions with Dr. Theophilo Obenga. And he gave me his number, Dr. Theophilo Obenga's number. And so I called Dr. Obenga. At this time, he was at San Francisco State University in California. And so we began having conversations. And when he found out that I was in school for computer information systems at the time, one of the first things that he said is that, oh, you will be very good at linguistics. I think you should really consider it. And, the more I got into my studies of trying to deal with and learn Egyptian, the more and more it became apparent that I needed to learn linguistics, especially when it came to the question of the meaning of Kemet, which sparked this whole thing. So around the same time, was learning the hieroglyphic script. And, one of my teachers at this time who I got lessons from was the late Unc Mira, who wrote the book, Let the Ancestors Speak, removing the veil of mysticism from Medu Neter. And he also is or was a student and learned Medu Neter from Dr. Theophilo Obenga. And so there's a particular genealogy in which I have in terms of my Medu Neter scholarship. But at the same time, again, while I was in school for computer information systems, I double minored actually in African American studies and African studies. And one of my African studies teachers was Dr. Karen Kleiman. In 2003, she released a book, The Pygmies Were Our Compass, Bantu and Batwa and the History of West Central Africa. She is a student, or was a student, now a colleague of Dr. Christopher Ehret out of California. And she's out of the history department in the African history department out of UCLA. And what's unique about this program is that those who come under Ehret all have to learn linguistics, historical comparative linguistics, to do and teach history. And so that is their main moniker. And this is what she taught us in the 2 and 3 classes that I took from her at the University of Houston. And so this is where I was formally introduced to linguistic concepts and methods. And so, but, you know, with my focus being computer information systems, I only had a limited, you know, formal training while I was at the University of Houston. And so once graduating, you know, I wanted to continue. And so I sought the mentorship of a variety of different linguists. And one of those linguists is Dr. GJ K. Campbell Dunn, Dr. Graham Campbell Dunn. And, you know, he's done a lot of work on comparisons, for example, between Indo-European Niger-Congo languages, Sumerian Niger-Congo Bantu, Minoan, you know, language and culture. And so he is a linguist and a classicist, you know, well-versed in Indo-European languages, philosophy, and of course, African languages. And, but he's more so from the Joseph Greenberg school. And so, you know, I learned a lot from him. And, you know, he has, you know, throughout the years provided me with material that, you know, a lot of people don't have. And he's out of New Zealand. And so he is one of my trainers. Also, you know, Dr. Muba Bingi Bilolo, also a student of Diop in Obinga, formerly trained in philosophy, theology, religion, and of course, linguistics. Everyone in the African school learns linguistics. And so, you know, I reached out to him and he began to mentor me. And he's one of the reasons, matter of fact, he's the sole reason that I use Chiluba a lot in my work and in my comparisons. And so I've even published with him. I've gotten to the point where I could publish with him in some French works, and you know, continues to be a source of inspiration and things for me even to this day. And many of you, of course, know Brother Jean-Claude Mboli, who's an electrical engineer, scientist, but as well is well versed in historical comparative linguistics, phonology, semantics, semiotics, and things of that nature. And he has been very instrumental in my more later developments, you know, regarding historical comparative linguistics and in particular methods. And so, you know, so these are my offline or off campus, you know, mentors and teachers. And so, you know, I learned a lot from them. Then, of course, you know, with me just being a natural autodidact, of course, I bought hundreds of books and articles, you know, regarding linguistic subjects, and I went through the workbooks, contacted those authors, had conversations, and this is how you learn these things. And then from there, you know, went to more formal training in a different context, which we'll get to in a little later. But for now, you know, people always ask me, well, and to what degree and to what extent do we, you know, need linguistics, or who uses linguistics outside of linguists who are interested in linguistics? And you'll come to find out that linguistics has its hand in a lot of fields. And so psychology, philosophy, cultural anthropology. Matter of fact, Joseph Greenberg, who is, he has since passed, where we get the titles, get the labels for these African phylums, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, Khoisan, and Afroasiatic, comes from him. And he is a PhD in cultural anthropology, in the same way that Christopher Arid, Dr. Karen Clymer, are PhDs in history. But everyone, again, has to learn linguistics if they want to make particular strides. So it's the same thing with Dr. Theophilo Benga. Theophilo Benga is a PhD in philosophy. But again, you know, he has extra training in linguistics, in Egyptology. And, you know, in order for him to penetrate the philosophy, he had to learn linguistics. It was imperative for that rescue and recovery of these particular African concepts. And so again, historiography, history, again, like with Christopher Arid and others, Dr. Gonzalez, another friend and colleague of mine, was co-authored a book recently on Bantu, all come from, you know, history backgrounds. But again, they all have to learn historical comparative linguistics or just linguistics in general. Computer science, religious studies, like if you study the work of Modupe Oduyoye, who does a lot of comparisons between Egyptian, Semitic languages, and the Yoruba language. You know, he's first and foremost a theologian, but he's also a linguist. And he needed linguistics to be able to penetrate his biblical studies. And so, you know, and then of course there's mathematics and logic. It is not so much that linguistics helps with mathematics and logic to an extent, it's more so the other way around. That logic and mathematics enhances linguistics. And so because linguistics really is a field of logic and philosophy and not science in the truest sense. The only branch of science that linguistics really is a part of in terms of the physical sciences is the dealing with phonology, and then to a certain degree neurology is involved when you're dealing with the connections between the mind and certain physiological responses and even of course the relationship between the brain and speech, or even in terms of biology, the larynx and its role in the development and evolution of human speech. But that's another conversation in there. But when we take into account that linguistics finds itself in all of these different categories, you know, it's a wonder why linguistics is not taught as a required subject in Africana Studies. And in Africology, the African-centered or Afrocentric study of African history, especially at the Temple School, linguistics is a part of the entire makeup, because, you know, especially I would put it under the category of forensic linguistics. And so they even use linguistics in courts. And so when they're tracing and trying to ascertain whether a particular person wrote a particular like note, or if it was somebody's signature and all of that leans on the field of linguistics. And so linguistics is everywhere. And for those of us who are trying to better understand African culture and history, I don't think I have to tell anyone who's familiar with my work in this channel that linguistics has been indispensable for what it is that we do. And so it lets us get to the heart of the psychology of the inner logic of a people. And so this is one of the reasons why I wanted to offer this to the lay public. And so I mentioned Modupe Oduyoye earlier. And again, he is a theologian. I think he's in his 80s or something now, living in Nigeria. Here's one of his books, Words and Meaning in Yoruba Religion, Linguistic Connections in Yoruba, Ancient Egyptian, and Semitic. And in this text, he says, any student of African beliefs or of any pre-literate society who does not have this tool, philology and linguistics in general, is severely handicapped. Any researcher who undervalues it does so at his own peril. For language has preserved for us the inner living history of man's soul. Emphasize living. Language has been described as the oldest living witness to history. Without linguistic corroboration, archaeological evidence is tantalizingly inarticulate. And here is a challenge, to use Professor Idowu's words. Each one of us must get to know his own people thoroughly and approach their belief reverently and sympathetically, because we possess that which is the key to their soul, their language. So if you don't understand a people's language, if you don't understand the importance of language and understanding the psychology and the theology and the culture of people, you'll never be able to penetrate the people and to understand them. And so for us in the diaspora, who are the children of enslaved Africans, whose for the most part their ancestral memory has been erased, and we're trying to recover our ancestral traditions and culture and worldview, if you don't have linguistics as one of your tools, as an instrument of analysis, then you won't be able to fully understand that which you're trying to recover. You know, there'll just be concepts to you which you'll have some mediocre, understanding. But to have a full understanding, to be immersed in it, you have to deal with the language. And so linguistics helps us to do that. And so I mentioned the role in computer science. And so when I started going back to school and things for computer science, one of the things, there's several courses that we had to take on linguistics. And that's because the kind of field that I'm involved in terms of artificial intelligence and computer science, is what we call the cognitive science. It's a cognitive science. So cognitive science is an interdisciplinary scientific study of the mind and its processes. And so you can see from this graphic here, these different disciplines that are all interconnected in various ways. And so, of course, we see linguistics on the right hand, but remember what I said, like with Mubabinge Bilolo and Diop and Theophilo Benga, they're all philosophers as well as philologists and Egyptologists. But it's the linguistics that helps their philosophy, that enhances their philosophy, the study of philosophy. And so, even Theophilo Benga has a whole entire book released in 2004 on African philosophy, but he's able to penetrate it because of his background in linguistics. And so you can't deal with philosophy without at the same time dealing with psychology, because the psychology and the linguistics and philosophy go hand in hand. And so remember that I mentioned Joseph Greenberg, who was an anthropologist, but he became a major name in linguistics, ironically. But he knew early that in order to understand African history, you have to understand linguistics, and you have to be prepared to go deep into linguistics and to make linguistic arguments. And so linguistics is connected to anthropology. And then, of course, if you're dealing with psychology, you're dealing with neuroscience, as I mentioned before. And then, of course, if you're dealing with computer science, you're dealing with all of this, and especially linguistics, because we're trying to create code that mimics to a certain degree the logic of human language. And in order for you to be able to do that, you have to understand human languages. And what is syntax? What is morphology? What is saying a head word, in terms of a particular sentence? What is a semantics? How do we get machines to operate and think like humans? That's where the artificial intelligence is. How do we get computers to learn and respond in a way that humans do, but more efficiently and faster? In order for us to be able to do that, to create the code, we have to understand linguistics and anthropology, because we have to understand human social systems, because we're trying to imitate that via electronics and code. So I'm hoping you're getting a better understanding why linguistics isn't just some, it's not an elective, so to speak. It is very important to what we do in some serious scientific fields. And so now, because the importance of linguistics and the relationship between linguistics and computer science, you can now get degrees, dual degrees in computer science and linguistics. And so at UCLA, my linguistic lineage, starts there. They offer linguistics and computer science, and the University of Illinois offers computer science and linguistics. And so, the way that we learn linguistics and computer science is a little different than what you would probably learn in most programs, because we're learning it in a way and to codify it in a way that we can utilize it in script. And so the definitions are a lot more precise. We have mathematical definitions that must agree logically, and ambiguity is out of the way, because of course we don't want to confuse the software program, and things of that nature. So we can't be ambiguous and confusing, and vague when it comes to these particular concepts. So we have to learn it in a way that is a lot more precise than a lot of folks who go through just a linguistics program would have to learn it. So, linguistics as a tool in sociology. Now I'm gonna give you some examples. So for those who have my text, Nesubiti, in the introduction, I have a brief discussion on the etymology of the word woman in Indo-European, and it traces the definitions, current definitions of adult female human, but it's literally a woman man in terms of its makeup of the word and how it is broken down. It's an alternation of the word wifman, where we get is really like wife man, or wife of a man, or wife man. And it means woman or female, basically, and female servant. This is going to be important as we move on. So we're looking at the term wife now, since the word woman derives from the word, the concatenation of wife or with and man. We look up the word wife or with, and it says from Proto-Germanic wiban, of uncertain origin. And it tells us here that, of course, a woman, a female, a lady, even the word lady, I should have added the word lady here, because that's, you're going to find it's a derogatory term as well. But from Proto-Germanic, possibly Wifa, source of Old Saxon, Old Frisian, Old Norse, Danish, Swedish, Middle Dutch, and High German variations of uncertain origin. The etymology is still being debated right now, but what we do know is that apparently this word with or wife was felt to have an underlying semantic relationship to inadequacy. Its basic sense is inadequate, leading to a more distinctive formation with men. So it's the inadequacy, the female or an inadequate being, which leads to the more distinctive formation with men. Remember, that's where we get the word woman from. Dutch, for example, has the word with, which now means in slang girl or babe, having softened somewhat from an earlier sense of bitch. The modern German cognate also tends to be slighting or derogatory. So we understand that this word has more so of a derogatory sense to it. And so it's not a word of honor and praise. It's derogatory. So let me see. from 1200, whip took on a common, almost vulgar tone that restricted its usage in certain circles, and it has been replaced by frau. And I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. I don't know if it's frau or frau. The more usual Indo-European word is represented in English by queen. Words for women also doubled for wife in some languages. Some proposed Proto-Indo-European roots for wife include whip, to twist, to turn, to wrap, perhaps with the sense of veiled person, and more recently, gwib, a proposed meaning shame, also pudenda, which is a, how should I say, a female body part. So they're known basically for their vaginas and anything associated with it. And so it's female pudenda from one of the proposals in terms of the origins of this word. And so, they mentioned the more notable term queen. So now when we think of queen, especially in the conscious community, we think of it more so in terms of royalty, but that's not its historical association. The word queen, young, robust woman, also means a female serf. Remember, the word woman means in many respects a female servant. So a serf is a servant, probably from the same root. A hussy, a prostitute. So remember, we got the word bitch for wife, and so a queen essentially is a prostitute, a servant. And so that lets you know the relationship between a queen and a king. Sorry for the phone. But that lets you know the relationship between a king and a queen. A queen is not on equal standing as a king. A queen is a servant. She's a prostitute. She's a hussy. She's the worker, in essence, of the king. And so I'm saying all of this to say, and to give an example on how linguistics helps us to understand history and sociology and cultural anthropology. So when we look into the Indo-European culture in general, we notice that their women are not valued as high as in certain other cultures around the world. And because they're not valued as such, as we have just seen, all of the words associated with women have a derogatory sense to it. And so now we see how that psychology plays out in Indo-European culture. So for example, when I had more recently took a class on Greek and Roman history and culture. And this is the book that we read, The Romans, by Anthony Kahn. And so he says in the text, the Romans believed that all women should be under the control of a guardian who might be the father, husband, or a male relative, or someone appointed by the will of the father or husband, or by an official of the state. So women were under the guardianship of men, period. Whether it's the husband, father, brother, whoever, as long as it's a male. So there's a hierarchy here. Women are under men. The only exceptions up to the time of Augustus were the 6 Vestal virgins. After Augustus, the rule was relaxed in cases of freeborn women who had 3 children and freed women who had 4. Provided that there was no husband or father to exercise control, it was customary for marriages to be arranged and for the size of the dowry to match the social standing of the prospective bridegroom. We continue. Women in Roman times, though discriminated against and subjected to abuse by poets such as Horace and Juvenal, were still capable of standing up for themselves when aroused. One of the most contentious pieces of Roman legislation was the Opium Law, brought in on the proposal of the tribune, the Gaius Oppius, after the defeat of Hannibal and at Cannae in 216 BC, with the object of reducing speeding on luxury goods. Among its conditionings were that no woman should possess more than half an ounce of gold, wear a dress dyed in a variety of colors, or ride in a horse-drawn carriage in a city or a town within a mile of it except on holy days. So they can't drive by themselves except on holy days. They can't wear multiple colored dresses, and they can't have in their possession more than half an ounce of gold. So the point of this being is when you understand the history of feminism in the United States, you got to understand European history as a whole, but more so to you see how the linguistics enhances it. So the very term that they used for a female human being were all derogatory terms. Then it explains why the men felt that they should treat their women the way that they do. So if a woman can't have more than a half an ounce of gold, of course you can't pay a woman equal pay because they don't deserve that. It's in our culture not to pay and give women, and have women have just as much money or more than men. So again, in a sociological, historiographical, cultural, anthropological sense, linguistics helps us to get clarity on this history. And so you can understand why these white women, fight the way they do, and to the extent that a lot of them really just hate men because of the way that these European men treats them. And so this is one example of the use of linguistics in sociology and cultural anthropology. So now in history, so remember, Christopher Ehret is a PhD in history, but he is more known so as a linguist to a lot of folks. But in an article, Language Evidence in History, Language Evidence of Religious History, Dr. Christopher Ehret made these words, or wrote these words. Word reconstruction alone usually allows only modest inferences. Its main usefulness is in establishing historical continuities. That's going to be the key there in the establishment of historical continuities. If a name used today for a particular kind of spirit, for instance, can be shown to go back with little or no meaning change to an earlier language ancestral to the modern one, then the concept denoted by the term can be seen to have been current at least since the period of existence of the ancestral language. That evidence by itself will not, however, define the position of the element in earlier systems of belief. That is, will not testify whether or not its overall role or significance in thought were the same as the present. So basically what he's saying is that, what linguistics does in terms of historical comparative linguistics, because word reconstruction and phonological reconstruction is one of the main purposes of historical comparative linguistics. So this tool of analysis allows us to reconstruct history, but more so it allows us to make historical connections between groups, and ancestral groups. So if we have two modern groups who have the same word for a particular type of spirit, and it has been demonstrated that these two groups are related, we can infer that this word goes back to the mother language and culture that gave birth to the two modern cultures that are distinct today. And so what this analysis does is demonstrate the connection between the religious connection between these two groups, but also the connection to some ancestral culture in the past. And so this is exactly, the kinds of things that we do. So for example, in Mboli's work, he demonstrates, for example, that the bilabial nasal, voice nasal M in Chicam or Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, corresponds to a nasalized voiced velar the G sound in Sango, which is a language in the Central African Republic in Central Africa, just right above the Congo. And what you can see between these, I have them bolded, is that wherever you see M in Egyptian, you see Sango has ng, as in sing in English. And so because these words do not relate to each other in any form or fashion, and these are regular, there's a regular sound and meaning correspondences between the two languages. These two languages are connected historically. And so, we tentatively reconstruct for both of these sounds, the mother tongue must have had this sound here, ngu. And this ngu became G in this language, and then it was subsequently nasalized. But in Egyptian, it became M. And in Egyptian, M and B interchange and correspond internally when we do an internal analysis throughout the diachronic history of Egyptian. So this one sound from the mother tongue became this sound in Sango and this sound in Egyptian. So, of course, with some other more detailed studies, we can demonstrate that the Sango language and the Egyptian language derive from the same mother tongue. So there's historical continuity. So we should be able to go to Sango to help explain some obscure concepts in Egyptian, in ancient Egyptian. And so that's the historical continuity. And so it doesn't just stop there. That same phenomena happens, between Egyptian and Kikongo or Chikongo. And so this word ngolo, force, becomes, it corresponds with bara. This here is actually an L or R sound. We argue it's a nasalized vular trill, a type of R sound, which is why it corresponds with R and L and N in Egyptian. So, but this is like bara, this because of this wa suffix. But it's force, might, power. Some people just say the ba, but it's not ba. That's not an A sound. Ngo, leopard. Here we go again. Bara. And I'm just making up vowels. So we don't know what the vowels are in Egyptian. So, but leopard skin, leopard, panther. These are the hieroglyphs for it. And so the Congo, Chikongo language drops this sound. So it no longer has, it only has the beginning sound, this here. And so remember I told you that M and B correspond and interchange in Egyptian. And so the same word for leopard skin and leopard and panther, they actually pronounced it with an M sound. But it's the same, fundamentally it's the same word. It's just a word for big, dangerous animal. Because you'll find this same word for elephant as well. So it's just talking about big, dangerous animal. And so in one dialect, they use M. And so it lets you know that there was probably a sound M, like in comb, like, comb your hair, that M sound at the end, and that split. But we also see Sim. So you'll always hear about the Sim priest. But in Bantu, they are known as Sango. In South Africa, they are known as Sangoma. They have another suffix to it, Sangoma. And so this is a Sangoma priest doing divinations right here with the fly whisk on the floor and another instrument for doing divination in his hand. Pay attention. But notice also the leopard or cheetah skins. because in the African languages, in what I call Chiena Intu, by means of paronymy, which I explain in my book Nesubiti, they related words that sounded similar. So the word Ngolo, force, Mba, force, Abara, force, power, Ingo, leopard, and Mbara, leopard, panther, because they sound the same or similar within their respective languages, these separate African people made the connection, and now this is why you see the Sango priest, Sim priest, wearing the leopard cheetah skins. And if you know about the Sim priests, they were the ones who would do the sacrifices and divination and spiritual work on behalf of the king and, of course, the various Egyptian communities. So we see a female, a woman Sangoma, Sim priest. Here's the hieroglyph for it. And in the Egyptian, you see here, Amen Ma'at Ra, Ma'ach Heru Nebu, Lord of Bu, or Nebu. And you see here with this, and I forgot to put the source of this, but you see the Sim priest here with this item in his hand, this stick, the same stick that you see here, that this woman, Sangoma, Sim priest, is holding in her hand. Let you know that he's doing divinations. And so you see also the fly whisk in her hand. Same as you see over here at the bottom here for the hieroglyph, for the determinative for the Sangoma. So we're showing continuities. The same way that Egyptian and Sango has continuities, the Amazulu and the Bakongo have continuities with the ancient Egyptian. They all derive from the same mother tongue source. And so, you know, these are the extended and living traditions which you find in ancient Kemet amongst these Bantu speaking people. So there's historical continuities that, you know, allows for us to make these particular connections. And so even in your religious studies, and so this photo that you have here in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh specifically, a lone gunman ran into a synagogue and killed 11 people. 3 of them included were police officers. And so President Trump, you know, probably under pressure, came to Pittsburgh to pay his condolences. But there was a group of Jewish people that belonged to an organization called Bend the Arc. And they wrote an open letter to President Donald Trump. And in that letter, which I will not read the whole thing, these 2 lines stood out to me for different reasons. But it says, President Trump, you are not welcome in Pittsburgh until you cease your assault on immigrants and refugees. The Torah teaches that every human being is made Bitz Zalim Elhaim, in the image of God. And so the argument is that since President Trump has run and successfully won the presidency, his presence and his rhetoric has awakened and put battery packs on a lot of racist individuals who have been committing acts of violence across the United States. And that this act of violence from this one individual is in part the result of the green light to act a plum fool given by the president because of his own rhetoric and his not being held accountable for what he has said and done in the past. So now everybody else feels that they can do the same and get away now that they have a leader that allegedly has their back in this present time. And so he's the authors of this open letter is saying the Torah teaches us that every human being is made Bitz Zelem Elohim, in the image of God. And so I have highlighted in red the root here, zelim. And so this is Yiddish Hebrew here. But what they're talking about comes from the Bible, Genesis 1:26, where it says, let us make Adam in our own Selim El-Hayam. And so this is a glottal stop sound in front of Dam. We don't have this in English unless you really kind of, remove some sounds, like when you say something instead of something. Something. It's like it's a almost sound that gets stuck in the glottis in your throat. And so it's Adam, Salim El-Hayam. And so this is a plural marker here in Semitic. And this is a word for gods or powers, or in essence, angels. But, Elo in the sense of El is the singular God. And so this word here, Selim, finds cognates in the Chadic languages. And so it's Chelim, spirit double, personality soul. In the Payam language, Shalom, spirit double, personality soul. Now, why is this important for understanding this verse in Genesis 1:26? Because everyone interprets this word Selim to be the image, as if it is just simply a mirror image, like in how we look. So this is why everybody thinks that, God resembles a human being. Because, of course, if we're him and we're in his image, then God has to have a physical makeup like that of a human being. But that's not really the case, because this word has to deal with a personality type, a spirit double. And so when it says let us make Adam, remember Adam, well, it depends on which verse you read, because in one verse Adam is singular, and then in another verse Adam is a group of people. And whether they are human beings or not is questionable, because when they want to say human being, they say Hadam Enosh. Enosh is the word for human, or son of Adam. Those are the humans, but these are another group of individuals. But that's a theological debate for another time. But in other words, here the humans are the spirit doubles of the angels. It doesn't necessarily mean that they look like them physically in terms of makeup, but that their makeup, who they are in terms of the humans in general, is the spirit double in this world for them in the spirit world. And so there's a particular assessment that we got to understand within the African context. And that is, every human being, according to tradition, has a spirit double. In the Akan, they call the spirit double the Sunsum, or Sunsum. In Tree, it's Sunsuma, or Sunsuma. And so you'll also see it as the shadow in a lot of literature. In the Yoruba tradition, they say Ori. In isiZulu, it's Ina. And I know for those who are familiar with the Yoruba tradition, they say that the word Ori means head. There is a homonym Ori, head. But Ori here is your spirit double. That's why you pray to your Ori. So I wake up in the morning and I say, Ori, guide me, Ori, guide me, Ori, guide me. Ori, support me, Ori, support me, Ori, support me. Or support my abundance, or support my future children, or support my relationships, or protect this house. It is my Ori whom I shall worship. It is my Ori whom I shall worship. It is my Ori whom I shall worship. Protector of the children, my inner character is thankful. Ashe. Let all good things come to me. Ori, give me life, I shall never die. Let all good things come to me. The spirit of light belongs to Amikisi Ashe. Elaro, Elaro, Elaro. Orimopoyo, Orimopoyo, Orimopoyo. In English, Arumila, please descend. Arumila, please descend. Arumila, please descend. Ori, I call on you. Ori, I call on you. Ori, I call on you. This is one of the prayers in Ifa, in the tradition of Ifa. That you wake up and you get your mind right. Trying to get your Ori in alignment, so you and your spirit double can work together during the day. And so These spirit doubles, they act as guardian angels, and they are your spiritual directors of the fate of the person on earth. As a matter of fact, the word genius in English is etymologically refers to a spirit double. And it says tutelary or moral spirit who guides and governs an individual through life, from the Latin genius, guardian deity or spirit which watches over each person from birth. Spirit, incarnation, wit, talent. Also prophetic skill, the male spirit of a gens, originally generative power. Thus, to successfully engage in any enterprise on earth, one must consult his divine alter ego, therefore their double. Successful human endeavors are the result of a partnership between two persons, the human actor and the spiritual director. So we, for the angels in the biblical tradition, for the Elohim, the powers, we are the agents that get stuff done on earth for them. They are our agents on the other side that helps to get stuff done here on earth from there. So that's why in these African traditions, you have your Sunsum, your Oris, your Innas that you're supposed to be in alignment with. That you make supplements. That's your primary deity, is your Ori, your Inna, your Sunsuma or your Sunsuma. And so linguistics helps us to get a better understanding of these concepts. And so you can't, I argue that you really can't understand much of anything in the Bible until you understand linguistics. Linguistics helps to demonstrate and prove that most of it is a myth. But that, again, is a different conversation. And so lastly, I mentioned that mathematics and logic was instrumental in linguistics, and especially in computer science. And so I mentioned earlier that, you know, the way that we do linguistics and computer science, it forces us to make certain types of equations. We have to create equations for linguistic concepts because we have to be specific when we're making particular arguments. Because when you're writing code, you're writing arguments, you're writing logical arguments, you know, from beginning of code to end. So logic and philosophy are instrumental courses that you have to take in computer science. And so if we wanted to, for example, define a synonym mathematically, we would represent it for those who are not familiar with what a synonym is a word or a phrase that means exactly or nearly the same as another lexeme in the same language. And so we would say that this right here represents a meaning or a word with a particular type of meaning that has this phoneme set. So these represent sets. So you got to understand set theory and things of that nature. But these are sets or functions in many respects. And so this is one word represented by A1, A2. This is a series of a finite series of phonemes. And then we have a second word here by a different set of phonemes, finite set of phonemes, but they ultimately mean the same thing. So normally we represent these as kind of different graphs, but we're focusing on the meaning here. But the representation of the word, which has the meaning here, is represented by two different characters, A in one set, B in another set, to represent this word. And so to give an example, the word valid is the same as this phrase or word here, justifiable. And it approximates the meaning of legitimate, which means justified. So we can see just being the root of both of these meanings here, but these are synonyms. Valid and legitimate are synonyms. They have the exact or near the same meanings in the same language. So this is how we would represent that mathematically, to talk about, you know, two words being synonyms. And then from here, we would translate this into code in terms of a variable. Same thing with a homonym. So a homonym is a morpheme or homonym deals with morphemes with an identical phonological shape, but etymologically incompatible meanings. So using kind of almost the same thing for before, but a little differently, we're saying that this word here and this word here with the same shape. So notice that in both of these, what's in the brackets or parentheses are the same phonemes. So for our purposes here, these are going to represent phonemes. So phoneme 1 corresponds to, in this word here with meaning X, corresponds with this phoneme here with meaning Y. So this translates this word here with this phonological makeup is the same as X, which has some meaning. But it is not equal to this word with the same phonological series or strings, which is the same as this meaning here. So X and Y here are different meanings. So for an example, the word jam is the same as jelly fruit spread, but it is not the same as jam, which is the same as, well, it's not equal to jam, which is the same as, because this is what this means, same as. It's a kind of equal sign, but it's a little bit more precise. A predicament. And so jam, jelly or fruit spread you put on your bread. But to be in a jam, like a traffic jam, or being a jam at work means to be in a predicament, kind of more so has a negative sense. Or if African American, the word jam has to deal with the intensity of a song or an experience dealing with music, the spontaneity of it, the rhythmicality of the music and or experience musically. And so this A1J corresponds to this A1J. This A2A corresponds to this A2A. This A sub N, corresponds to M, or this A sub N over here with M. So they match in terms of the phonological representations or graphical representations, but they do not have the same meanings. So if we wanted to write this to make sure that we have, to define the rules in linguistics, especially if we're doing comparative work, this is the formula which we would use to discuss the rules. And so there are other logical formulas, because linguistics, again, is a branch of logic and philosophy. So when we talk about a phoneme, which is a set of phones, it's not a phone. A phone is a minimalist speech sound, but a phoneme, may have one or two, more than one representation for that particular grapheme in the language. And so in language L here, two sounds, and I should have made this red, A and B, belong to the same phoneme, which is a set of phones. So they belong to the same set if and only if, this is logic here, there's even a formula for representing that phrase, for all strings of sounds. So these represent strings of sounds here. And so in physics, this would be vector notation. Let you know that a particular particle or whatever physical object, moves within time and space in a given direction. So it's a vector quantity or whatnot. So if both the sounds A and B are concatenated in between these two strings and and belong to L, the language L, they have the same meaning. But we say that A and B are allophones. That's what we're trying to say here, allophones. That means you can switch these sounds, whatever these sounds represent, in that one word or two words, and it will not change the meaning of the word. So, for example, in English, we say the word spirit, but most folks don't pronounce the word spirit as spirit with the hard P or P. We do it as an aspirated P with an H type sound. So we say spirit. And I don't know if you can catch the distinction, but P and PH are allophones in the word spirit. So that P, the regular P, would be here in this representation, but PH would be here in this representation. So within this environment, this set of strings, P and PH are allophones in the language of English. And so we fundamentally say that here. We also say the following. If, this string is concatenated, if this set of strings concatenate in between this particular phoneme and belongs to the set L, then the pair, which we write this way, is an environment for A in L. Another word for environment is context. So within the context of this set of strings, which we see here, this is a set, this particular phoneme has this representation. But in that same environment or context, another sound can be substituted, like the PH in spirit, even though we spell it as P with P, unaspirated, even though it's really kind of hard to not aspirate P. But anyway, so this is how we represent this mathematically. And so mathematics and logics helps and enhances linguistics. And again, this is what we learn in computer science in terms of handling, creating programs and things of that nature. So don't want to take too much more of your time. Again, I just wanted to introduce you to the class that I'm offering on my website. Right now, it's just $40. And it's going to increase in a couple of weeks. So I would take advantage of it now. This is the primary book we're using, but this is going to change because I've come to find out that this book is out of print now. And so you can still get it at some places at the regular price, which is like $30, $35. But because it's out of print, most of the books is going to be in the hundreds for this. And so as a result of that, I'm switching. And this is the alternative book for those who have already bought this book in anticipation of the class. So it's an introduction to language, and you can buy the ebook off my website at www.asarmhotep.com. So this is the current course that I'm offering. I'm in development of these two courses here: Introduction to Historical Comparative Linguistics, parts 1 and part 2. So now we can really get into the meat of things and really penetrate Cheikh Anta Diop and Dr. Theophilo Benga and Mboli and Muba Binge Bilolo's, and of course my works, by understanding, this. But before you can get here, you have to understand these basics here. So this is the foundation, these works. So I appreciate everyone for listening. If you're listening live, I will see if there are any questions. And I can stop sharing my screen. Actually, I can't see if there are any questions because I can't see where. I guess I would have to go to my other computer because I don't want to slow up this one to see if there are, in fact, anyone, with any particular questions. So bear with me for a second as I go to my YouTube page at the moment on the other computer. So if you see me looking this way, it's because I have another computer right here. So I will pause it. And so let me see if there's anything in the chat room. Waiting for it to pull up because it's acting kind of slow. So let me see. I don't see any questions. Want to say hello, Monica, Mac Tip, Patrick Beecham, Robert Rand in the chat room, the Amun Tassetti, Peace Brother Garfield, Brother Sean, Strife, and Tamika. Just want to say peace all. I don't really see any questions. So, I do see one question. It says, I have one question. Kikongo concept in linguistics on soul or ori. Well, ori is a Yoruba word. If you can kind of retype your question so you be a little bit more specific so I can at least try to answer it more accurately. Brother Richard Fortune. So, sorry, what is your thoughts on the practice of circumcision? I really don't have, any thoughts. I understand it historically. It just really depends. Like if you got it done when you was a baby, I'm pretty sure you won't remember it. But, in the ancient Egyptian tradition, they did it when you was a young teen. So I'm pretty sure that hurts. Is there really a reason for it? I don't know. There's some psychological reason for why that happens. And I haven't been able to really kind of pinpoint because it's so old a practice that it's kind of hard to penetrate why people do that. So I've heard reasons of, opening one's feminine power to, this whole concept of rebirth and things, and they're plausible, but, I need something a little bit more precise. So I don't really have an answer, for that. And so, I'm more of a descriptive type person, and meaning that, first and foremost, I'll study for the fact of understanding something the way that it is without trying to pass judgment on it. So, a lot of things I understand is cultural. So I try not to have, unless it's just a clear loss of life and just unsuper necessariness, like with female circumcision, to me, that's just ridiculous. But I try to understand first and foremost from their cultural perspective, but there's just really no reason. Men just have extra foreskin and, it evolved that way for some reason. Maybe it protects from something. I don't know. That's a biological question, but, I don't really have too much of an issue with that when it comes to men. But when it comes to women, and there's just no point. So let me see. Message retracted. I'm waiting on Brother Fortune to reword his question. Remember that his question was, I have one question, Kikongo concept in linguistics on the soul or ori. Okay. Could you explain why Hebrew is considered authentic? I keep finding sources that say that Hebrew today is actually Aramaic and ancient Hebrew is actually Phoenician. If that's the case, what's Hebrew? No, Hebrew. Well, yeah, Hebrew is actually a Canaanite dialect. And so you have a group of Syrians and some other folks who settled in Canaan and adopted the Canaanite language. And over time, it began to develop its own dialect in the same way that New Orleans English is not the same as the English in New York for New York cats. and you can always tell when you're in the presence of any one of these, two language speakers in the Black community. But that's essentially what it is. So I don't know what you mean by authentic. I mean, it's an authentic language, but today's language is changed in a way that all languages change. So there's no such thing as an inauthentic language. All languages are legitimate. Is that languages all change, and they reflect the history and culture and the circumstances of a people at a given time. So if you can understand that, I hope to answer your question. And so is soul. So what is the soul? I have a whole lecture on that. So just go to my YouTube channel and look for my, what was the presentation on? Why spirituality is not science and all this other kind of stuff. I go through what the soul is. And if you have my book, Nesubiti, I give you what the soul is in Kikongo. And so, it's just your name, but, there's some discrepancies on how certain dictionaries define the soul, trying to translate into English. But ultimately, your soul is just your name. Asar, always great and well presented information. Unrelated question. In the introduction of your book, Nesubiti, you mentioned the ritual in some African cultures of changing the female to a male. I assume there's some more and it just wouldn't let you type anymore. So I'm gonna wait a little bit. So the rest of your question will pop up if that is not all of your question. So what I talked about in the beginning of my book, Nesubiti, is that the concept of gender is a little bit more fluid in many African societies. And so you can ritually become male or female depending on what particular circumstance, because the idea of a male or a female has to do with a particular type of role, within the society. So if you play a certain role, in that role, you are a woman if you are born a male, and vice versa. And so there's one example that I gave that they had to deal with inheritance. Culture had to deal with inheritance. And so the inheritance goes to the firstborn male. But if someone doesn't have a firstborn male to pass their inheritance to, they have nothing but daughters, like in the case that's cited in the book, then they would just magically, make the daughter a son. And now she gets the inheritance. And so just keeping with, customs. So, a lot of African traditions, they are really big on customs and tradition. So instead of totally changing the tradition, they'll just alter it anyway so that the tradition stays intact. But they still are able to accomplish what they need to accomplish. So in this case, the inheritance, the property going down and still being within the family, but the father not having any male heirs makes the daughter a son, and she now is able to inherit. Doesn't mean that he thinks of her as a male child. That's not what it is. It's just a title. So in other words, a male and a female, a man and a woman are titles in many African societies. It doesn't necessarily reflect gender. And so that's what I discussed at the beginning of the book. Hold on. Why do you think in non-paternal culture or society where the distinctions aren't important, would that ritual even be necessary? I think I just answered that in many respects. So let me go to the next one. They tried to pass it off as if there was no mother tongue. What language is Hebrew a dialect of? Thanks for your time. This is very helpful. Okay. You're welcome. Brother Patrick, in Richmond, your work has helped me to understand deeper the religion and my part here in the islands, Paulo Mayombe. I appreciate it. Is that some gay thing, Tamika? No, it's not a gay thing. Again, it's not. These are not sexual. This has nothing to do with sex. And, another thing that you're going to have to understand about, learning other cultures is that your current cultural lens will sometimes cloud how you perceive other cultures and how they do things. And as a researcher, you have to abandon that practice. So that's why I mentioned earlier that I try to understand things the way that it is, no judgment, so that I can understand it from the cultural standpoint, from the people whom I'm trying to study. So for instance, if you go into the Middle East and in Africa, men hold hands. It's a sign of friendship. In America, because we're so hyper sexualized here, two men holding hands is a sign that they are homosexuals, that they're not just friends. And so you can see ancient Egyptian and Nubian artwork and statues with males holding hands. You can find the same thing. You can go in the Middle East right now, in Israel and in Saudi Arabia, and you will see men holding hands. But they're not homosexual. It has nothing to do with sex. It's just a sign of friendship. But because we live in a very perverse place over here, that's what that means over here. And so it's just like we can do this even on a street level. So for instance, like when you go out to Cali and you say that somebody is a crab, or you talk about BK, being a crab is a derogatory term given by members of the Blood gang when describing the Crips. They call them crabs. And so when the Crips want to talk about, their ability or willingness to assassinate members of the Blood gang, they say BK, like my name BK all day. So when you in California, you got to watch your words. You can't be talking about somebody's a crab dude, because that's a disrespect to an entire gang of people. You can't talk about this entire gang. But if you go to New York and we talk about BK, we ain't talking about no blood killer. That's Brooklyn. Brooklyn all day. Every square inch of Brooklyn is BK. That's why you go up a little bit north, you in the BX for the Bronx. And when you talk about a crab, it's just some shiesty dude. He's this dude's a crab. It has nothing to do with talking about gang members. But I'm using this as an example to show you that, you have to understand things in context in the places that it. You can't judge the New Yorkers and how they use these terms in letters in the same way that the people in Cali do. But if you're a New Yorker and you go to Cali, you better make sure that you understand the difference, or you can have problems in Cali, Texas, Arizona, places like that whole Southwest, West Coast that had that same culture. And so when you come to New York, understand that you're going to hear that stuff all the time, and it's not going to mean the same thing as what it means back home in Cali. So it's the same thing in this respect. So I hope I'm kind of rambling now, but I'm hoping I'm answering your question and bringing some clarity. So hold on one second. Is this similar to yes? Like in some cultures, I mentioned that some women become wives, but it's not sexual. They don't have sex. It's a title. It's a social standing. And when you become a wife, it comes with certain privileges. So they're doing that to help their family in a certain way. And again, so these words, you got to be real specific in the context of the culture. And so there's even a book called what is it? Male daughters and female husbands, talking about the social situation in Nigeria, so you can understand that. So I forgot the author of the book. I have it, but talking about, you know, these ideas in Nigeria, and it has nothing to do with sex at all. Yeah. Hold on, peace and landscape. Jalbino, peace and blessings. Thank you for your work, or peace, and again, thank you for your work. You're welcome. Let me see. Let's see, not again, anything with Somali. I just couldn't understand why. Anybody? I give you 2 men kiss and I be gay. Can 2 men kiss and I be gay? It depends. Again, you know, in some cultures, men will kiss each other on the cheek, like in Italy, like in the Middle East, and some places in Africa. But kissing in the mouth and tonguing, no, I think that's universally gay. Let me see. Are you familiar with the argument made that the true people of the biblical text are actually an African tribe called the Ewe people? There's a guy who uses language to identify them in the Bible. You'll, first of all, when you go and deal with African people, you know, because there's a certain prestige associated with the Bible and the Quran, every damn group swears that they are the people of the Bible and the Quran. And the bad part about it, which a lot of them gets some justification, is that the Semitic languages ultimately are related to African languages. To what degree of their relationship is still being argued and debated in certain circles. And so, you know, I have my opinion on that as well. Matter of fact, Jean-Claude Mboli is working on a work as we speak, which goes into that argument. And, you know, he and I are on the same boat in terms of our interpretation, that it is ultimately is a mixed language, and that it was some group of Africans who came out of Africa who met up with a group of people in the Middle East through long contacts and intermarriages. They created a Creole, which became then a first language, and Proto-Semitic is born. And so there are a lot of words that come out of Semitic, that are in Semitic, that you'll find cognates for in African languages, like Ewe. And so I mentioned, what's his name, Dr. Modupe Oduyoye earlier. And so his textbook that I mentioned, I have a copy here. So the meaning, it's going to be hard to read the title, at least from this. But words and meaning in Yoruba religion, linguistic connections in Yoruba, ancient Egyptian, and Semitic. You're going to find cognates with these languages, but that does not mean the Ewe people are Israelites. And so there's ways that we can tell that, and historical comparative linguistics will bear that out. So again, linguistics, it is a tool, it is an indispensable tool for answering these types of questions. So we can tell off the back if the Ewe people are lying or not, or if they're just trying to associate themselves. Because you go a few blocks from there, and there's some group there that swear that they're original Arabs, and they all just happen to be Muslims. And so, you know, it's we have to be able to separate fact from fiction, and you have to have tools to be able to do that. My accent. Hold on, it's Richard Funch. I remember when I was in college in New York, my accent, calling a guy, "What's say de man?" Some guys heard me, thought I was saying diamond. Man, why speaking about my man's like that? Okay, y'all having another discussion over there. me see. How they construct a family. How they I was trying to, but I wanted to know if it's legit. There's a lot of pseudo teaching. And yeah, and so again, one of the reasons why I'm offering this course is to help the conscious community. I'm not charging hundreds of dollars like you would at a college university. I'm really just setting you up so you can study on your own. I'm giving you the foundations, what you're going to need to know, which I had to learn out the hard way, you know, over a number of years. I'm trying to cut that out for you to give you the raw basics so that when somebody makes claims like this, you don't have to go to no authority to see if they're correct or not. You can go into the information yourself and ask the critical questions. And so this is one way that we can get the pseudos out of the way, where they can't go too far without being confronted with, you know, researchers such as yourself who understand and who have this tool at their disposal. So, you know, when you have people talking about Africa comes from Africa Newt, Africa Ra, and can't show you that in the hieroglyphs in any particular papyrus, or can't break down and name none of that, can't tell you what language, how that came, how the Romans even got it from ancient Egyptian, and they ain't deciphered hieroglyphs yet. You know that pseudo, or when the Moors want to say every MR consonant sequence that they find in the book means that all these people around the world were Moors. But they can't tell you the Moorish language. They can't tell you a pronoun in the Moorish language because there is no Moorish language. The Moors spoke Arabic. They were Arabs who were ruling Black folks in Northwest Africa, in West Africa. They were not, there's no Black original Moors. But you know, if you don't have a linguistic mindset, you won't know what questions to ask them. Ask them, what's the word love in Moorish? How do you construct it? What's the typology of the language? Is it subject, object, verb, verb, subject, object? How do you construct sentences in Moorish? Because they want to claim that every language, every group was Moors, but they don't know nothing about what book. Can you point me to a book that describes Moorish language? Can you describe the word Moor in your Moorish language? You know, these are the kinds of questions that you have to ask. And so, you know, linguistics, if you understand it and proper, remember, linguistics is about logic. So it enhances your logic to be able to make certain arguments with people regarding certain concepts. Let's see. Do I Crack 88 asks, Sar, do you know anything about the masters of the net in ancient Egypt? No, never heard of it. You have to give me a source on that so I can review it and to see if I have come across it, if I understand it within a different context. Let's see. Okay, that seems to be, sorry for the delay. That seems to be the last question. So everybody in the chat just having their own conversation. So I'll just end it here. I appreciate you all for listening, and I hope I've, you know, inspired you to, you know, at least look at linguistics a little bit more seriously and to take it up as in your toolbox. So, you know, it's very indispensable, and we can have some more deeper and richer conversations if you understand this and have this in your arsenal. So again, I'm offering an introductory course. It's 8 weeks. It's a crash course. So you will have to purchase one book, but I also give you books and articles. Because again, I'm just setting you up so that you can learn on your own further. And of course, myself and you have a whole community of people who understand this stuff that you can continue to ask questions and learn under. And so we're going to go from the introduction to a more advanced, the historical comparative linguistics. But since phonology and all of that stuff is very important, you need to understand that first. You got to go through the introductory course. So you can't take, at least with me, the historical comparative linguistics course without taking the intro course. So again, right now it's only $40 US. It's going to increase in some weeks. So I just want to make it super feasible so that y'all can get your feet wet. There's quizzes every 2 weeks, and you get a certificate at the end, and hopefully we can get together and do some linguistic works. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate your questions, and y'all have a blessed Saturday evening, and I will catch up with y'all later. Hotel.